Hi, this is Randy Kay, co-host of Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. In this episode, we do our best to respond to your comments and answer your questions, whether we see them on Facebook, on YouTube, or as fan mail. Thank you for listening and liking and sharing our podcast. This episode is for you. Welcome to our podcast, Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. From the place where schizophrenia and real life collide. East Coast, West Coast, Middle America. With Miriam Feldman, Mindy Greiling, and Randy Kay. Well, welcome to this episode of Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. It's just the three moms tonight. I'm Randy Kay, and I'm here with Mindy Greiling and Mimi Feldman. And we get letters. Well, actually emails, basically, but we thought we would just take some time and update and answer your questions as best we can. And there are some comments that we want to talk about. So in case you're new to the podcast, we are three moms. We each have a son with schizophrenia, grown sons with schizophrenia. I'd say we're at various stages of family recovery right now, and we are well into our fifth season of this podcast, and many people are just discovering us. So welcome. You can always write to us by commenting on one of our YouTube videos, which a lot of people are doing. On our podcast website, there's a place where you can send fan mail, and it says, please give us your contact information if you want us to answer you, and many people don't. So we figured we just take this episode to do that. So I know we were going to jump right in with the questions, but I got to ask how you guys are doing. Mindy, let's just start with you. How are you? How is Jim? You are smiling, my friend. What is happening?
I am smiling because Jim moved into supportive housing this past week. He's been there since last Wednesday, and he was so excited, so nervous, and he had a panic attack in the afternoon that lasted until he went to bed. Because just so remembering that stress, good stress is still stress. And then of all things, he moves into this award-winning, architecturally beautiful building and everything just as it should be to support people like our sons. But the unit that he moved into, the ceiling sprung a leak, and pretty soon it was a pour and some plumbing problem in the unit above. So that just was not what he needed when he was already stressed out. But that's all fixed. As of yesterday, I was there. And the ceiling had dried, it had been plastered and painted, and we hung all his pictures. Our family went out to eat. I have to tell you guys, for our listeners, this is heaven, because as anybody that's listened to me knows, we've been worried about dying and leaving Jim in the lurch. We don't have any family here in Minnesota. My one other child is in DC. So this is the answer to our dreams. And if that wasn't enough good news, tomorrow I get to go to Annapolis for the Treatment Advocacy Center Symposium on AOT. And I've been on the planning committee. I'm on one of the panels talking about local advocacy. Dr. Laitman, one of our stars, is speaking at it. His son, Daniel, is going to do his comedy spiel. I've never heard him in person. So, yes, I'm smiling.
Absolutely. And, as you're speaking, in case people don't know, here we are. I'm just trying to find the episodes. So we did an episode of should people live with family? And that's where Mindy first started talking about this place. And that is episode 108. And you will learn about the type of housing that can be available. Many people write to us and ask, where can our loved one live? And there's 50 states in this country, and each state is different, but we always encourage you to keep looking, keep asking. All right.
And I just want to say one more thing.
Please.
This is a government paid for housing. There's there are good places and they cost tens of thousands of dollars a year. This one is paid for through his medical assistance, through his caddy waiver, which is community access, and also through his SSDI. It's anyone could afford this place in Minnesota. So I hope everybody doesn't move here though, because there's huge waiting lists to get in. It's
Right. Jim
not
was
easy.
on the waiting list for how long?
Well, at one time he was on the waiting list for 3 years and never got a call. And then this time, because he was in the hospital with clozapine poisoning from his pneumonia last summer, then he got on the waiting list again. And so this time it's been about 6 months.
Okay. So I would say we encourage, there are many ways to find a future for our loved ones, especially as we approach the time in life when we may not be here to take care of them forever. And so I've seen everything from, I remember I was in Houma, Louisiana after my book, Ben Beyond His Voices, came out about 10 years ago. And they had a wonderful community that was totally funded by donations, where everybody had their own little home. Everything was on a cul-de-sac. There was a clubhouse. We did a show early on Fellowship Place, and I can look up that episode for you as well, which is in New Haven, Connecticut. And there's a clubhouse and housing, and it's affordable housing. It's a third of your income. And if your income is zero, it's a third of that. So there are places, they generally have long waiting lists. And I would say, do your research, go to support groups, go to NAMI support groups, and ask people. Call 211 if there's a warm line in your state for information. Find out if there's housing for people, or affordable housing, especially with services for people with mental illness, and ask, and get on the waiting list, because the time's going to go by anyway.
Push. And this one I forgot to mention does have rental assistance as well. Jim pays 30% of his income, and that's because he's supplemented by a program called Bridges, which is Minnesota's version of, if you can't get Section 8, you get this.
Okay, fantastic. Now, Mimi, your son Nick is you're kind of supporting him in his apartment, is that right?
Yes, he is on SSDI, so he gets something between $700 and $800 a month, a check. And then he also gets EBT. And so they give him $150 a month for food. So it's hardly something that you can live off of. So we augment it, but he is in housing in Washington that is actually subsidized housing for old people and people with disabilities. So it's not specifically mental illness. So most of the people in his building are just elderly people. And then there are a lot of them in wheelchairs and, things like that, bedridden. And then there's a few younger people, 30s, 40s,
Right.
who clearly have more of mental health issue, of which Nick is one. So, and they each have their own apartment. That's the thing that's great about it. So it's not like he has to share with anybody. And it's kind of nice because the elderly ladies love Nick and want to bring him food and take care of him. And there's an office there and somebody who is the manager of the building. So it's not a mental health kind of like where Jim is. But there is a certain amount of support. And the really wonderful thing is it's subsidized, I believe, by the state of Washington and, through DHS and that kind of a thing. And so the rent is very affordable. So he can pay his own rent and buy some of his food, and then everything else we have to pay for.
Anyhow, exactly. So, thank you for that, because, and as we're doing, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just looking at my phone, because that's where my information on our episodes. I just want you to know that if you're confused about any of this and you're new to our podcast, it would be a lot of listening to listen to all our episodes, but we do have episodes about conservatorship. for schizophrenia. That's episode 6. We have in season 1, we had episodes where we spoke with Dr. Laitman about some of the people have asked us about medication, and we can't recommend medication. Everyone's different, but many of our sons have happened to have done well on Clozaril. My son is not on it currently, but the Dr. Laitman episode, you can just do go to our website and do a search on Dr. Laitman or Clozapine. You'll find episodes. We do have episodes. If you don't know what SSDI is, it's Social Security Disability. We have 2 episodes with my cousin, Dani, who is an expert at this. And I believe one is episode 50 called Help, I Don't Understand Social Security. And there's another one we did a little bit later. So we have episodes about, and that's episode 70, by the way. So we have episodes about a lot of things. And I want to begin with a question that came up as a comment on our YouTube channel. So if you're listening to this wherever you get your podcast, we also do a video of this, and it's on YouTube. And in an early episode we did with one of our favorite guests ever, Judge Lisa Wexler, it was a 2-parter because this is a woman who is such a fair and wonderful probate judge. She has her own radio show also, the Lisa Wexler Show, I think it's called, but she was on talking about what it's like from a probate judge's point of view when you have to get right to involuntary commitment or right to Medicaid over objection or set up a conservatorship. And one of the comments on YouTube said, well, I don't think I could ever abandon my loved one, thick or thin. I'm with him, which I applaud completely. Good for you. But I couldn't help but respond and say, there is abandonment, which is the judge was talking about. She does deal with some cases where the families have totally given up. And then there's setting boundaries. And one is not the same as the other. And I want to bounce my answer off of you guys so that the listeners, I will share that my son, who I call Ben for public purposes, has had a rough couple of years, including substance abuse and incarceration. This was after an amazing period of getting off Social Security and working full time, and is currently, thank goodness, living in a sober home. But over the last 6 months, I have chosen to hand over conservatorship of his money to an attorney so that if he texts me, it's because he wants my love, not my money. So he's not texting me as often. And also, he is not currently accepting any treatment or taking any medication. And sadly, that is going to, it might possibly get in the way of being able to live in a sober home. Now, I am thrilled that he is sober. I saw him a couple of weeks ago, and I took him food shopping, and he was holding it together. And part of me thought, oh, maybe he's getting over this. Maybe it was just the drugs. I dared to hope, which I never regret. But, we got a call from the house manager that Ben is disturbing the other people because he's in the middle of the night. He's talking very loudly to his inner voices. And so he is in danger of losing his housing. And I wash my hands of it. I can't help him because I have another child, I have grandchildren, and when he is actively psychotic, he is frightening, and I don't want to frighten the other people that I love. Now, am I abandoning him or am I setting boundaries? So that's the dilemma. I love him, but I need to say, you want to see the family, get back on your meds. We love you. I say all the right things. I do all the LEAP. LEAP is another episode we did with Dr. Amador about listen, empathize, acceptance and partnership. And I'm saying all the right things, but he's making particular choices. And I'm thrilled that he's sober, and I will sometimes come see him, but I do not want to frighten my grandchildren, and they will be scared of him. So What are your
I
thoughts on
think
that?
I think the key there is you're not abandoning him. He's in the sober house. You know, that's where I draw the line. I could never see Jim be homeless. You know, some people have no choice because that's how things happen and the system won't allow them to do any differently. But I throw my body at anything that might smell of Jim being on the street. I've done things like go on public radio and contact everybody I know, and I have a lot of political connections and go to the press. And I'm just a madwoman if I thought Jim was going to be on the street. But beyond that, we, like you, Randy, have done exactly that. We can't see you if you're scary, if you're not doing well. There was one time when Jim got in the car with our granddaughter, who at the time was, you know, I don't know, 8 or 10, and my son-in-law, and he was just high and out of control. I ended up driving to the police station and finally getting Jim out after threatening to go in and get a police officer to get him out. Told my son-in-law to take my granddaughter home. And then I went into the police station with Jim and we finally got him back to where he lived. But he was coming over and I had to say no, and I couldn't get him out without stopping at the police station. So I'm a tiger about protecting my other family members as well. I think no one could argue with what you were doing. It's right in keeping with what I have done.
Uh,
I think that there's something a little bit sanctimonious about this stand of, well, I would never not have him live with me. You know, I'm going to say it if no one else will. We also deserve a life that has a modicum, a baseline of security and safety and all of that. And I mean, honestly, I feel the same way you do, Mindy, and I've gone to bat, and Nick never has been homeless. But I made my peace with the idea that that might happen many, many, many years ago, because there's a line. There's a line. I mean, you can't have an active fire in your house and have any kind of a life. And if they won't take treatment, if they're actively psychotic, if they're threatening or violent or whatever, we hear these stories of people locking themselves in their bedrooms at night and the terror that they live with. And I mean, sometimes there's just no way other than letting it take its course and hopefully being there on the other end of it.
Yeah. And Jim has been living with us, as you know, for the last 5 years, but that was under the proviso that he not use drugs and then a lot of other things like don't make a mess and that sort of thing. But the safety things had to come first. And he got sober before he came here. And we never dreamed he'd still be here all this time. But I kept him here happily because I was always afraid he'd go back to that girlfriend that I've talked about before and that I talk about in my book. And now she actually died this summer, as I think I mentioned on another program. And so now I dare to have him live somewhere else, not having to be haunted by her coming there and getting him back onto crack and things. The lives we live, I think that's why we like each other so well. Who else would relate to this kind of thing, for
All
heaven's
the other
sakes?
moms, that too.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to get to some of the emails, and I'm just going back. I'm not going to give names, obviously, but just we have a listener from Pennsylvania who just says, thank you so much for the incredible work you're doing and the resources you're providing. It means the world. So we just say, you're welcome. Here's one from Australia. I just love hearing from all these places. Hi, moms. Much love to you from Sydney. You've been in my ears for years, starting during COVID. Thank you for all the information and sense of community. I'm not alone. And then she talks about her daughter who's had early onset treatment resistant schizophrenia. And that's not really a question. But thank you. We just appreciate that you wrote. There's, so many people write to tell us your stories, and I don't know if that's for air. So, I thank you for writing from Los Angeles, California. Here's a question from Hutchinson, Kansas. All right, so this is an interesting one. I continue to listen and consume. Thank you for what you're doing. I'm not sure you can help. My daughter has schizophrenia, is taking her meds regularly, is doing great. Therapy is so-so. Not sure we found the right one. We totally get it, but she's tired of starting over with a new one. So she goes on to say her daughter's hearing one voice, and I don't know how to help her with this. Different providers saying different things, any guidance. And I don't know if we can provide any for, you write to us from medical and therapy information, and
I would just say, though, not being a doctor, that voices, it depends on, is the voice nice or not? There's a lot of people that had a lot of very vicious, mean voices. Jim has had command voices telling him to do terrible things. And but if your meds get you down to one voice and it's a nice voice, a lot of people live with that. I'm not medically competent, but I've just heard a lot of people that are satisfied to have just a quieter mind, but still not totally quiet.
that sounds like a much better answer than I gave. Mimi, any thoughts on that?
Well, I honestly don't have that much experience with the voices because, Nick has never been forthcoming about it. Now, of course, I knew he had them because I could tell, but the closest that he ever came was once we were walking in downtown Olympia, and there was somebody on the street screaming at the top of his lungs, obviously to his voices. Now, I don't know if this man was in psychosis or on drugs or what it was, but it propelled Nick and me into this conversation. And at one point, I said to him, well, when you were hearing voices, I mean, that guy seemed so upset when you were hearing voices. Were they nice voices? And he just looked at me and like shook his head and said, no. And that's the only time he's even acknowledged it.
Jim is quite reticent to admit to voices too, but he still does hear them, and his are not nice either because he hears real people's voices like mine saying, I wish he were dead. I can't stand it that he's here and I want him out of here. He's just a nuisance. He's ruining everything. He hears my voice saying things like that. He hears other family members' voices, or if we're in the restaurant or something, he'll hear the next door table saying things like that. They're always mean and vicious, tearing him down, but he doesn't hear them all the time. And luckily he does sort them out, and he will ask me, did you say that? And I can say that I didn't. And sometimes I have to convince him. He's pretty sure I did. It sure did sound like me. But most of the time he will accept that that was not me and he should trust the real me, not that voice.
Wow. Do you think peer support helped him with that at all, or is this just something, a conclusion?
I think if he's with peers, I don't know, he never has had peer support, counseling him type peer support. But when he's with friends, and all his friends at this stage also have mental illnesses and they are understanding. But when he's with low stress situations with his friends, that displaces the voices. He's distracted by that. Something better is going on. He's more apt to succumb to voices if there's nothing else going on, or if we're watching TV and he thought that I said something. If we're just talking and he's engaged, then that displaces the voices.
Wow.
But by and large, through everybody that I've spoken with and everything that I've read, the voices are rarely nice. I mean, it's almost always awful.
That must be
Yeah.
that must be terrible. I can't we all have quiet doubts. I call her Negative Nelly, the person like, you can't do that. You can't start a podcast. What do you think you are? But it's not really a voice. It's just, it's a thought. And I think that is not frightening because we have them. But if you've heard voices for many years, it's got to seem as real as anything else. Even in his treatment, even his voices are just down to manageable, Mindy.
Well, Jim has the best, he has Dr. Laitman, and Dr. Laitman said, his son still hears voices, that it's not usual that you can just silence all the voices. And if you had so many meds that you did, you might have stultified the rest of your life. So you have to find a balance where it's a tolerable ratio. And, most of the time, Jim is fine. But in stressful situations, it comes out. And he's fine with he doesn't want to be on more meds, but he does occasionally ask for more clozapine. And Dr. Laitman says, I think you're on enough. So he's never asked for more of any med. He's been the one that hasn't wanted to take meds or so many meds, but he knows this clozapine helps with negative thoughts. And I think I shared that he took so many when he was in charge of his own as needed meds that he ended up not knowing where he was on the University of Minnesota campus and called us, but didn't know where he was. So he wants to get rid of them.
Rid of the voices.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, who wouldn't? Again,
right.
we need more money going into research, but we're doing the best we can. Thank you. So this woman writes from Indiana, and so this is about her brother has schizophrenia, and the whole family is having trouble dealing. And basically, he initially was getting help, but thought he was being poisoned. And when she visits her parents, her brother leaves and goes for a walk. He doesn't come. When he comes to holidays, it's hard to have a conversation. So here's her question. Do you have a podcast in particular or any thoughts of how we can help him or get the relationship so he can get help? He was a brilliant, kind, amazing person. So
I don't really get what
she's basically saying, and this is a question we probably can't answer, but I want to address that. He won't take help. He won't take medication. He's difficult to live with. How can we convince him to get help?
Well, leap. The leap. I mean, my experience has been to hopefully follow one of those things. And as we all know, I'm a big proponent in lying, cheating, and bribing. Anything that you can do. I mean, we've had moms, I've talked to moms who crush up the medication and put it in their food. I mean, there's a lot of different, because and I'm not saying that's what you should do, so everybody doesn't have to freak out, but it is done.
No letters, please.
A lot of times it's a matter of easing them into a point of being lucid or clear enough so then you can start to convince them. You know what I mean? So sometimes just getting some medication into them long enough, or perhaps maybe convince them to try an injectable, which then lasts a month and gives you a month maybe of more clarity where you could reason with them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this whole conference is about that I'm going to with the Treatment Advocacy Center, assisted outpatient treatment. But unfortunately, you have to get into the court to reach the high bar of civil commitment, or if you're in the court system in any way, shape, or form. Jim has been in both. that just sharpens your ability to get them to take meds because there's a legal reason. And Jim has been saved by being committed actually 7 times, and he had a probation officer with his when he burglarized our house. All of those times it gave much more power to the system to help him. And if you have someone that doesn't reach that level, then you're right, maybe you have to try every trick in the book and whatever works. I was at a workshop once where the psychiatrist said they started people on like supplements and vitamins because often the very people that won't take psych meds know they don't feel good. And so they'll agree to take those other things. And then you can kind of gradually weave in something that would do even more good. But just anything you can do you have to do it.
Thank you. And this leads into a couple of people have asked me this question, and it has to do with medication. And if people have provided their contact information, we've written back and saying, we're not advocating any particular medication. But what we often have on many of our episodes is advocate to remove the obstacles if clozapine is the one that works for you. I would say that's fair. But people are asking, and this went right out, what meds are helpful to your sons? She goes right out and asks the question. She says, this is someone whose husband has schizophrenia and he's on lithium and Zyprexa and it's not improving. And we're also going to strongly encourage NAMI family to family or reading books like Surviving Schizophrenia, I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, Nicole Drapeau's, Gillen, I think is her last name, Handbook for people with schizophrenia. Like, read all you can to learn all you can. But we had another similar question, and I will say, for my son, he did the best when he was on Clozaril. Nothing else worked the way it is. He did okay also on a long-acting injectable of Haldol. So, clozapine isn't the only one. We have had guests on our podcast who are on long-acting injectables of risperidone. If it works for you, you want to do it. But, we talk about clozapine, Clozaril a lot because a lot of people don't prescribe it, and it can be very helpful, but there are other meds that work.
Another path that we tried at one point is clinical trials. Sometimes if the person is resistant to getting treatment, but is homeless or needs money or, is in a bad situation. We did get Nick to participate once in a clinical trial because they paid him, and that got some medication into him. And that also helped with, because when you're in a clinical trial, they do a lot of evaluating and testing. So that helped hone in the diagnosis too. So, that's something else a person can look into.
Okay.
And Jim is on clozapine, and he's been on almost every other medication. He was on a long-acting injectable Haldol for more than 10 years because nothing else worked when he was not allowed to take clozapine due to a faulty blood test that they gave him. And now he's back on clozapine. He's night and day on clozapine. So I am for Jim and many other people, just a complete advocate. If your loved one is doing well on a medication, keep them on it, for heaven's sakes. We've had guests that are on other drugs and they're stable and they're doing well. Don't mess with success. But if they are not doing well on whatever they're on, clozapine is absolutely where you need to try it next.
Okay.
It made Nick's voice is completely gone. Nick has no voices now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I don't know because my son has never admitted to hearing voices. And again, to him, they may just be his reality. Like, he may not perceive them as voices. I don't know. But I know when he was on Clozaril, which He was on it combined with Depakote, which I don't think was the best. I wish we had known Dr. Laitman, who might have prescribed it differently because he did gain weight. But he was able to focus. He was like the best waiter in the restaurant, could handle 5 or 6 tables at a time and keep them straight. So I think you have to
Wow.
quiet your voices for that to happen. We only have a few more minutes, and we can do this again if you want. Just write to us and tell this. We have had questions about our son's been incarcerated and he hasn't been diagnosed in jail. You know, could that affect his sentencing negatively or positively? That is a state by state question. And so I would definitely contact a lawyer and find out. I know when my son was incarcerated, because I am co-conservator of his person, I was able to call and speak to the warden and make sure he got his injections, which they did. It didn't affect his sentencing one way or the other. He never got sentenced because he never got convicted. But I think certain things, check your local NAMI, call a local lawyer. We actually heard from a woman in Toronto who wants Clozaril. She has schizophrenia and they won't prescribe it. So, we want to really encourage you to check out the episodes that might answer your questions. Somebody wanted to know, Mindy, that you had mentioned something about a supplement that Jim was on, and let's turn you back to Dr. Laitman, who wrote a book about schizophrenia that's available on Amazon, and we've done a couple of episodes on that. Let your practitioner know that this protocol is the best way to prescribe Clozaril. So somebody wrote and asked if there was a supplement Jim was on that didn't work for him or something.
Yes, I think that's Team Daniel
Mindy,
has
I think
a
you need
Facebook
to
page
that's
got supplements.
Yeah, turn off your video because you're cutting out. It's very
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We went from internet. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's a little choppy, but
Okay. I hope it's fixed by the next program. But Team Daniel on Facebook, if you're taking Clozapine, has a whole chart of supplements they recommend to go with Clozapine. So check there.
okay, thank you. Okay, so and just again, we heard from somebody in DC, Washington, DC, and there's a few things that this person wants to share. Have either of you heard of a book called The Burden of Sympathy?
No.
Well, this listener says, I'm sure you're aware of the book, The Burden of Symphony. I don't think I've heard it.
I don't think so.
Yeah, no, me neither. So she says, and so we'll share it now. She says, or he says, I don't know, because there's no name. I found it enormously helpful in case your listeners might also find it useful. And also pointing out the Wall Street Journal and New York Times had an impressive number of articles dealing with people with SMI, and that this listener has written to them. A Wall Street Journal article on Rob Dart. And this is interesting. So we can just want you to know that we hear you and we will talk about it. This listener has a suggestion. I wonder if you would consider a podcast on the use of AI as it relates to SMI. Yeah, well, listener, if you're listening and you know anything, contact us and let us know how we can get in touch with you. That sounds very interesting. And one final question, we just got actually maybe today from Waco, Texas. Again, this is, thank you for sending us your stories. And we just don't have answers all the time. If an individual has schizophrenia, here's the question though. We love hearing your stories, but the fan mail that we can answer is when you have a question. So the question is, if an individual has schizophrenia, can Clozapine work for bipolar and manic depression as well? thank you so much. I've learned so much through your podcast I've listened to so far. So again, the more you learn about this, the more you know. And there is something called schizoaffective, which is sort of a combination of bipolar and schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is a cluster of symptoms. No case is exactly like any other case. So we can't comment really on what medications work. We legally, that would be a big minefield, and all we are moms that have experience. My son doesn't have schizoaffective, he has schizophrenia, and I know that Clozapine worked for me, but I encourage you to read all you can about it and ask your doctor about it. But it has been known, I believe, to work for schizoaffective.
Well, I would say Jim has schizoaffective, and
Me too, actually.
it's definitely working for him. And then looking on the Team Daniel website, which is all about Clozapine, there are people on there with bipolar disorder that are taking Clozapine. So definitely ask your
Dr. Laitman
doctor.
has spoken about that too.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so you definitely do have an answer. Thank you. So anything else you guys want to mention?
I will just say, Randy, you people thank us for learning things on here. I thank us too, because we're now working with the trust organization in Minnesota that was recommended by our guests when we had the podcast on trust, and we are having to go to court to change our current individual trust to a pooled trust. And we're following all that advice that I learned on that podcast. So I thank us too.
Well, if you want to, listeners, support the podcast, contact the podcast. We have a website. Buzzsprout is our podcast host, and there's a website there. You can send fan mail to there. If you want a response, we do our best, but we need your information. I have texted people back, but again, this is a grassroots podcast. We're not sponsored. We're just three moms who've written 3 books, and we're all very happy to tell our stories. Mimi, you're going to be talking to an organization in South Africa, correct?
Yep, at the end of the month. And on the next podcast, I'll give them information about that if anybody's interested. I'm going to be giving a talk about stigma, which I plan to just go over stigma briefly and then steer into why we shouldn't get stuck thinking about stigma. But they may not.
I love it.
Once again, I'm the unpredictable one, but I have to be. I feel so strongly about that. And then also my publisher, Turner Publishing in Nashville, now has a podcast themselves, and I'm going to be doing a podcast in April about. I'm going to be the guest on the podcast talking about schizophrenia, my book, and everything. So
wonderful.
The more talking with you, the better.
Yep, and Mindy's on her way to DC for the Treatment Advocacy Center, and
Annapolis.
Sorry. Same basic geographical area. I am going to speak to.
Yes.
I'm going to be speaking in a couple of weeks to CIT trained officers and mental health practitioners in Connecticut for Cable CT, Connecticut Alliance for, I forget what it is. I need to look it up. The Connecticut Alliance to Benefit Law Enforcement. And my talk is called Ask the Family how you can engage the family in helping. And, kudos to crisis intervention trained practitioners and officers. Thank you for all you're doing. And, I want to hear your point of view as well. So, we're out there doing our best in many ways.
Feel free to invite us to speak for at your organization or anything, because we are definitely up for that.
Yep, absolutely. And you can help the podcast mostly by telling other people about it. Share it. We have a Facebook group you can join. and we, contact us, join the Facebook group, and mostly tell other people about the podcast, because we're turning pain to purpose as best we can and always seeking joy. And it's our joy to feel like we're helping you. So Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. We'll catch you in the next episode. We have some exciting episodes coming up. Please join us. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. You can help out the podcast and help others by sharing the podcast and by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts and or on YouTube. And remember, you can reach us at mindygreiling.com, randyk.com, or miriam-feldman.com. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Schizophrenia, 3 Moms in the Trenches. You can help out the podcast and help others by sharing the podcast and by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts and or on YouTube. And remember, you can reach us at mindygreiling.com, randyk.com, or miriam-feldman.com.